Hi everyone, welcome to this new episode of Careers in the Jewelry Industry, a series in which we interview leaders in the industry about their jobs. And we already had a gemologist, a publicist, a gemstone cutter, a jewelry editor. So today we're going to have a jewelry photographer, Leo Bieber. Please feel free to ask questions. We'll try to ask Leo as many of your questions as we can during this live. If you have more questions, you can ask later. If you can't watch this live until the end, we'll be saving the recording in our feed, in a reel section, and also on our YouTube channel, Rappaport Jewelry Pro. And I'm going to be inviting Leo now. Leo has done some amazing work across different categories of jewelry, fine jewelry, high jewelry, gemstones. So he has a lot to share with you. And this series is really an educational series in which we try to get as much as possible from our guests for you to feel inspired and maybe start a career in the jewelry industry. So I will wait for Leo to be with us. Hi, Leo. How are you?
Nearly happened again. Very good. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Now I'm going to ask Leo the first question I ask all our guests. When was your haha moment? I'm a jewelry photographer.
Oh, wow. It's a brilliant question. I was shooting for a brand called Shatila, who are very big in London and in Geneva and in the Middle East. And we had a catalogue that we were doing. It was my first ever jewelry catalogue. And there was a lot of pressure under it. It was very kind of early on in my jewelry career. And then suddenly, actually, I got one over there. I had this catalogue in my hands and it looked fantastic. And to me, that was very much an initial kind of experience of, gosh, this has legs. Before then, I had been an assistant to a still life photographer and then continued as a still life photographer and interiors photographer. And it had never occurred to me that actually really diving into the jewelry world was part of my interest. It's what I wanted to do. And it's a subject which I found enormously interesting and complex. And I haven't actually lost that sense of new adventure even many years later.
And tell me, how did you start having an interest in photography? Because obviously you must have an interest in photography before specializing in jewelry photography. So how did you start this interest for taking pictures?
Well, I had been at school studying A-levels in England, and I was doing photography as a subject. And I was amazed how very well received I was. It was a very theatrical school. I was amazed how much fun it was photographing fellow students and kind of the world that you could create around photography. And then in leaving school, I ended up working for a still life studio. I moved to Italy, I moved to Florence, and I became an assistant there. And still life just opened this whole world for me. I was 19, so it was very early, kind of at a time where one kind of searches for meaning and purpose and a direction. And this direction was very immediate for me. You can create anything you'd like in front of the camera. No one needs to know what's on the periphery of the camera, behind the camera, around the camera. But what's in front of the camera is a whole world where you can tell your own narrative. And we were photographing for Ferragamo and Gucci and Dolce & Gabbana, all the wonderful Italian brands, all these amazing leather goods and handbags and shoes and things. It was a fantastic early job to kind of see how the professional world worked out. But I just discovered that there was a world which I was more interested in, kind of around that and beyond that, which I have been pursuing ever since.
So when was the first gig you had for jewelry?
It was Shatila, probably. I'd been photographing still life for different companies and brands, but I was still quite young, only about 5 years into my career. And an agency I was associated with in London wanted to put me forwards for some work with Shatila, who had plans to kind of rebrand and to kind of update. And then, this was a while ago now, but to update their brand at the time. And so I went in there and probably took the worst pictures of my life. I went in and took these terrible pictures as, just kind of a start to try and get into jewelry. And I didn't realize how complex and different jewelry was to photograph to anything else. And to my amazement, they accepted me as a photographer and we got the job. And then I really thought I had to catch up. How do I get pictures which look similar to the magazines and similar to what everyone else is doing, but to make my images look like that? And so I started off kind of researching jewelry and stones and kind of how one can play with this amazing material and this diverse material that, we work with in jewelry and to capture with light. And then that took me on my journey. I'm someone, I'm sure we'll get to it later, but I'm someone who's very traditional in my work. And I don't particularly like to retouch. I like to have everything done in camera. And with jewelry, it's such a fascinating conquest to actually capture jewelry without needing post-production afterwards, because there's so many different elements that you need to collect. But I would also like to say that I don't know if it's apparent in my work, but I actually build all the sets and make all the sets to my images. And part of that process is very exciting to me. And it goes back to, as I said, I was at theatre school before. I did a lot of set design and lighting design. That was my specialty at school. And it's something I do every day. To me, it is a scale this big. It's the size of a piece of paper, most jewelry shoots. Actually, most jewelry shoots are half an A4, unless it's a big necklace. And to create a whole world, this whole environment, this whole sense that you can relate to in an image, but it's on such a small scale. That is, to me, that kind of joy, and it takes me back, right to the beginning, where I really wanted to be able to tell a better story than I feel that anyone else had done and I'd never seen before.
So tell me, who's more difficult to photograph, a moody Shakespearean actor or a diamond?
Oh, I don't think of difficulty. Difficulty for me is pleasure. It's something that interests me as well. I like a more challenging piece of jewelry, and with that Shakespearean actor, you're relying on them to play their part, whereas what you're presented with in jewelry is it's finished, it's done. It's for you to have to do your bit, and I absolutely adore that. It is every day is a different challenge, and I have to learn every stone. I saw in your you posted online to promote this talk today, images from our book, Purely Bieber. I had to learn a stone which was discovered in 1989, brought to my market in 1989. Very few, when I started shooting, were really kind of that prominent on the market. It's only in the last 5 or 10 years where Bieber has really become a great thing. I would say I'm an industry leader in photographing Bieber from my experience of it. But that stone, to get to know, and all of its guises and shapes, and its clarity or lack thereof, it has the most incredible kind of solar system inside. Most of these stones, you have to really study each, origin of every stone, whether it's Mozambique or whether it's Brazil. Every cut, where it's cut, how it's. There's so much to show, and that's just one stone. You consider all those color spectrums of sapphires, of spinels, of all the different tourmalines, the diamonds, everything. There is so much to learn, and each stone, each cut of stone, needs a different lighting ingredient to make that stone stand out and look as perfect as possible.
Yeah, and do you think you need to have a gemology knowledge to be a good jewelry photographer? I wanted to ask you a bit more about the technical skills that you need. If we have people listening who would like to also follow in your footsteps and embrace this career, what kind of skills do you need to be a good jewelry photographer?
Well, my question to you about the gemological knowledge, is that a qualification on paper, or is that just a broad interest? Because to me, in most subjects, obviously you can't become a surgeon or an architect on just interest alone, you need the qualification. But with gemology, to understand the stones, there has to be an emotional connection, that curiosity, some form of material interest in the product. I don't have a formal qualification. I have done talks with the GIA. They have seen my images and reposted my images. They have an understanding of what I know and appreciate and celebrate within gemstones. I would be very hard beaten at identifying certain stones or their cuts or their origins. But that's purely from an interest. That's nothing so great as a qualification. And I would say that with anything in this world, if you have an interest in it and you want to pursue it as a career, you have to know as much of it as possible. But if it is an interest, you naturally do somewhat know as much as possible, I would say. If you wanted to be a jewelry photographer, I think the first interest is being interested in jewelry before photography. Very little of photography goes into being a jewelry photographer. It is lighting design, it is set design, and it's understanding of the material. The last element of the photograph is actually taking the picture, and I never hold the camera in my hand. In fact, there's a setup at the moment. The camera is on a stand right there.
That's fascinating. I think it's quite rare for us to be able to see the studio of a jewelry photographer.
Well, there's none
great.
of the equipment on at the moment, but there's my bicycle in the background from cycling in. But the camera sits on the stand there. And I never touch it. I set it up the image. That is the least important part of taking the photograph.
Fascinating. And you mentioned something that I think would be very interesting to just go a bit more into. You don't do any post-production. You don't believe in retouching the images. You believe in taking a lot of time and preparation before taking the picture. So can you tell us a bit more about this process? People thinking, oh, the image has been retouched. It can't look that good. It can't, for sure it's not the real color. Yeah. So especially now with social media and everything. So what is your process? What is the Leo Bieber process?
In relation to retouching is done to clean an image and to make sure the image looks as perfect as possible. When you shoot to such a small scale, dust is very relevant. You know, when people are handling jewelry with gloves, they leave a little bit of kind of thread and dust and fiber. So all of that has to be retouched out. So there is a retouching process. I have the top retoucher on my team who I spent years trying to find. She's absolutely brilliant. And so I do have retouching within the studio. However, the image that you see posted and looking perfect and beautiful is the image that comes off the camera. Yes, when you produce an image that has to go up to a billboard, it has to be seen with great scrutiny, it has to be clean, it has to look phenomenal. That's where the retouching comes in. But as far as the actual aesthetic of the image, the light, the way it hits, the reflection, everything in the metalwork and the stone, that is done in camera. And everyone is welcome to come to my studio and see the process. It's something that I've designed and created because I see the need of not degrading an image. To me, when you have a piece of jewelry, it has to be so aspirational. You have to be able to relate to it. And if an image is over retouched, then you lose that relatability. You lose the sense that you can actually take that image and put it on and try it on yourself. You know, we see it with makeup in advertisements, I beg your pardon, with models. You know, we can see that a model is over retouched, she's unrelatable, and therefore we question, will the clothes fit me? It's the same with jewelry. You have to have that emotional connection in purchasing a piece of jewelry. It's an impulsive buy. It is not a buy that you need. It's not going to, improve your life necessarily, apart from kind of an emotional stimulant, buying and having jewelry. But to provoke that emotional stimulation, the image has to be relatable, it has to be beautiful. And that, to me, is its authenticity. And that's what I try and achieve.
Thanks for sharing this. And we talked about working with the gemstones, working with the jewels. Tell us a bit more about working with the clients, because they're also a big part of the process. And I think that could be quite interesting because you work with designers who are invested in their work. They spend years developing a collection. There's a lot of financial pressure as well. So how do you work with your clients? Because I think that's also so important as a jewelry photographer.
Yeah, I work very happily with my clients, and I'm very proud of my clients. You have to listen, really. I have my own artworks that I do on the side. I have my own creative releases whenever I need. For me, when I work for you as a brand, I work purely for you. I'm representing you. It doesn't matter how I feel about the image. It doesn't matter how I feel about the jewelry even. What matters is that I best represent the brand. And so I have to get to know the brand, be it personally with the designers, with the gemologists, with whoever's involved, or historically, some brands I work with are 120, 150, 200 years old. You have to understand their heritage, their aesthetic, everything. So it's either creating a story for a new gemologist or brand, or it is continuing a story or modernizing a story, all of which is very interesting and something to celebrate. And actually, I was on a shoot last week with a wonderful company called Humphrey Butler in London, and Bobby, who I work with and adore. We were chit-chatting away. And I was taking possibly a little bit too long taking this one picture because, he was saying, is it going to be done soon? And we came to the conclusion that it's the most phenomenal piece of jewelry. It was this kind of a wonderful diamond necklace, but they were kind of somewhat pineapple cuts all the way around. Really, really brilliant, lovely diamonds. And I said, I always think to myself, this necklace took so long to make. It has been so intricately and lovingly put together, each stone faceted, for a day on end by one individual. And then the way that the necklace is so wonderfully put together, it's goldsmithing, everything about it. An extra 5 minutes, it is worth it. That is what the necklace commands it, and it'll be a better picture for it. And it was a brilliant picture. It was a really lovely picture. I would say also what really I adore working with brands is working alongside them. Like I was mentioning Bobby just then. We become friends, we go for lunch. We have a dialogue. He loves motorbikes as well, so that helps. So we talk about motorbikes and jewelry. There's some interesting fraternity in the jewelry world between motorbikes and jewelry. But we have a lot in common and a lot of interests, and I think that's so wonderful to work creatively and commercially with a company, which happens with many companies I work with. But you become kind of jewelry friends, and I'm sure you find it the same. Last time I saw you in person it was at a jewelry friend's wedding,
right?
And
and there was another jewelry person at the table as well. So we started talking about jewelry and photography, and we just connected this way.
Exactly. And that is what's so special. It happens all the time. And those are my clients, you see. And who could not love that? Of course, you get some difficult ones and difficult people. And, that is life. It really is life. But overall, it's the most rewarding experience. And it's always a challenge. Every image has to look individual in particular to the brand that I'm talking about. Everything has to look true to their narrative and their identity. That doesn't come easily. I have my fingerprint. I have to make sure that my fingerprint is diverse enough that it's relevant for every brand, and that I'm diverse enough for it. It doesn't always scream Leo Bieber, Leo Bieber. In fact, if an image does say Leo Bieber too much, I think possibly, unless it's because it's great quality, I think if it says Leo Bieber too much and it's a brand, then maybe I'm doing something wrong, because to me, the brand has to shout through the image and say, this is us, not this is Leo.
That's great. And I wanted to know, only photographies on still images or also on models?
So, difficult question. So for me, I know my strongest point is still life, putting together the concept, building the sets, the lighting, everything, the whole process. That is me. When brands come through and they want models wearing jewelry, but kind of detailed shots on hands or ears, just something against white, very plain, I also shoot that as well. I believe in trying to maximize as much as possible kind of the consistency of my studio to make sure that everything is settled and sorted. I do also have photographers on my books within the studio who I then put forwards for different, if it's more of a fashion shoot around jewelry, or a video shoot, or whatever it might be. I have other creatives who I work with who I like to bring in, and then they take over. And I oversee it, making sure the lighting and everything is true to the brand and perfect for the jewelry.
And how did you see the career evolve? I think you've been in industry something like 11 years, 12 years?
Yeah, well, the shoots I was talking about with Shatilo 2011, so that's 12 years.
So how do you see the profession? How do you see it evolve? Because, a lot of people actually don't think of jewelry photography as a career. And how do you see it being considered within the industry, and how do you see the future of this?
I'm very ambitious. I wouldn't do anything that wasn't fruitful. And to me, it's the perfect balance of being fruitful and challenging at the same time. And yes, there is. The demand is there. I'm very well booked. There are lots of lovely projects on the horizon in the past. So to me, there is evidence that it's there. I have some colleagues out there who also are jewelry photographers and doing wonderful jobs, and they have enough to sustain their families. So on a purely monetary value side, yes, I do believe that there is enough work and that it is a good industry. What I would like to say is there's also a lot that's misunderstood about it. We were talking earlier about, do I shoot on models? And I would say that models are of the past. I believe that still life is very much in the future. And the reason why I say that is we look at everything on devices. I'm talking to you now on a device which is, I don't know, what is it, 6 inches? It's very, very small. And that is where I get my information for what I want to purchase. That is, I see an image and I think, that's something I want to buy, that's what I want to wear. When I see it on a model, I have to rely on the fact that the model's ear is this big, and therefore there's an earring, but then to show an ear in context, you need a head, and then to show a head, you need to have clothes, and suddenly the earring is this small in the picture, and you just can't quite tell. So there's always, you have to swipe, and then you see the image big, and you see what the earring really looks like. But if you had a really beautiful creative image where the piece of jewelry is the image, and then there's a wonderful setting and everything, you immediately get a sense of what it is that you might want to purchase. It's so much clearer. And I think that the way we're going with technology, with smaller devices and less print and, kind of less, we're worried more now about the product than the celebrity wearing it at the moment. In our narratives, we're no longer looking at Vanity Fair or Vogue to what to wear now. We're kind of seeing so-and-so wearing it. And then it takes us to the link of immediately the product and the jewelry. And then we get lost going through the products and their competitors and everything. And to me, that is where we're going. What matters is the images. I don't even think that 360-degree videos, although I organize them for brands, I don't totally believe that those are the future. I think that's a fad for now. I think the more you go around an object, especially behind on an earring or behind a ring or underneath a necklace, you lose that romantic want and that joy of the product. I think really the success of the future and of this certain kind of corner of creative marketing is to show the product in full glory, but with just a beautiful sense of, color or drama or softness or romance, whatever it might be, in the picture to make you really kind of focus and stop your endless scrolling and say, that's something that I want to have.
So I'm going to say here, that's the editor speaking. I'm completely 100% behind what you've just said, Leo. Because when we receive pictures of a model, but the jewelry is very small and you have to kind of magnify the picture to see what the jewelry looks like, it's not good. And you just, you receive so many pictures, whereas if you receive a beautifully shot picture of jewelry that creates emotion and desire and questions as well. You want to know a bit more about it. As I agree with you, you don't need to see every detail, but you want to know more and ask more questions. It creates a very different relation with the jewelry and with the brand as well. So
invariably, if you have that picture of a model that you're sent, as you're saying, the photographer naturally has had a human connection with the model, and therefore he's or she has only focused on the model. And so they've been so concerned with how the model's looking, perhaps they haven't totally taken into consideration how the jewelry is looking. It might be out of focus because they focused on the eyes, or it might be moving, it might not have any light. So they then try and in post-production to bring it out and make it look amazing. And of course, they've lost that natural sense of the jewelry. It's like whitening teeth in an image. You suddenly lose the sense of a smile. It's not natural. There's so many things where you just kind of think, keep it natural. Let's keep it simple.
Right, agreed. I like that a lot, and I think that's very inspiring for people who be interested in jewelry photography. We have one question which is a bit, more personal, but I like it. Which piece of jewelry would you love to photograph if you could photograph any piece of jewelry?
Oh, it would always be the crown jewels, always.
Leo is British.
Did that not come through? Absolutely.
The crown jewels, still life. Not on the wearers.
No interest in being worn at all. There is so much that I'd like to see and to show. Absolutely, the crown jewels.
Great. And what's the most challenging thing about photographing diamonds?
Which diamonds? What cut? Gosh, I was once asked to photograph in-house in a brand. Instead of coming to the studio, everything was a little bit too valuable to have to leave. And so I went and I set up in an accountant's office. And I set up this wonderful set for these 3 diamond rings. And I kept getting a sense of red. It couldn't work it out. There was just a red something coming into these stones because they really do, I wear the same jacket every day so that I know what light I give off. I know the light at my studio. I know the color of the walls, everything. I'm very consistent in this, so I know what, a true color. But in this particular accountant's office, it turned out it was, I couldn't get rid of this little red flare in one of the stones. I really hunted around trying to work out what it was with my lights or what I was wearing. Did I take my watch? What I needed to do. Anyway, it turned out that on the far side of the room, there was a red accounting file. And it was just having a conversation with this diamond. So in moving the file, suddenly the picture had its, the colors, the diamonds looked pure and white and beautiful, and that was that. But the question is endless. If you're shooting an oval stone, you want to have it very straight on because there's a very gaping window that goes to grey. You don't want to show that. If you have a lovely emerald cut, you kind of want a certain brilliance coming from behind as well as in front, so you can kind of see the graduated facets going all the way down to the cuticle. There are so many elements that would have to be considered in photographing a diamond. Diamonds of color, they want more direct light than white diamonds, which want less direct light. It's an open question. You'd have to bring me the stone and I'll tell you how to shoot it.
Good to know. And tell me, which stone do you find the most fascinating to photograph?
I don't have an answer for that. It's a bit like a human. Sometimes you sit on the train, you sit next to someone and you just talk all day. For the whole ride, and then other times you sit next to someone at dinner and they're a friend of a friend and you have nothing in common whatsoever. I would say I love spinels, and so I've had great success doing projects with spinels. Lots of my personal artworks have been around spinels also. But that's possibly because the way they refract and the way they hold the colour, and also I think their inclusion patterns are very interesting. I'm slightly attracted to that, I suppose. But then, a beautiful green tourmaline, really, really clear, I find very fascinating. Actually, a Saburite garnet in that vein also. Mandarin garnets I love. I love that fiery red, that heat. I mean, I could go on and on. I have great experiences with many stones. Sometimes I'll photograph a stone family and type that I adore. I have to really I have to coerce it. I have to persuade it that this is what I want to be doing. I want you to stand still. I want you to be lit beautifully, because sometimes things don't go my way. That is just life. Stones really, when people talk about their energies or they talk about their personalities, they're right, absolutely right. There's so much to individual stones, which make it very hard to kind of answer your question, because I don't believe there's any true answer.
So hopefully my next question will be a bit easier, more straightforward for you. But what would be the advice you'd give to an aspiring jewelry photographer?
I would say be wary that you're going to have another job in the meantime. I don't believe in the first maybe 5 years that you'll be paying your rent. It's probably being like a bit like being an actor or other creative jobs in competitive industries. I think possibly going and housing in a brand would be very helpful. Even going to someone like Net-a-Porter or Matches or someone and being an in-house assistant or photographer. I personally do not take assistants. However, I do believe that being an assistant is a very good first step. I mean, there are many things that you can do. I think you have to really learn about jewelry, the industry, what goes into taking images. You need to practice. You need to take everything from your mother's sister, girlfriend's, best friend's jewelry boxes and see if you can get a good picture. See what's complicated about it. Don't do the easy way, do the hard way. Try and work out how. I always think that those earrings which are like gold studs, and they're totally round. Practice with something like that, or necklaces where they have just kind of like gold pearls, but they're not pearls, they're just kind of gold balls. Something like that. Because yes, you also have to learn about diamonds and things, but those are less accessible. But these kind of gold piece of jewelry, you can go to H&M and buy some fake jewelry. Just practice with it. Anything reflective is going to spark challenges, and you have to overcome those challenges before you can take money from a brand. Because really, that's what you've got to do. You've got to tell a brand, hey, I'm really good. You're not taking a chance with me. I'm going to get the right picture for you, and then you pay me money for it. Brands, certainly as I've experienced, and I don't know if someone else has experienced otherwise, they don't want to waste their time. They want to pay for a service. They want to know they're going to get quality, and that's that. And so if you want to be a jewelry photographer, you can't go straight to brands because you're obviously not going to be there yet. You have to kind of prove your talent and your worth first.
And talking about the equipment, what kind of would you recommend investing in the really high quality equipment to start, or just to be a bit more like average and then to upgrade as you get that?
I make all of my own equipment. Other than camera and other than a source of light, everything in the picture I've actually built and created. I don't believe there is equipment out there for jewelry photography. And I think when you compare my work with other photographers' work who are still life photographers, I think you will be able to spot the difference. I'm talking about lighting on a scale which is so small that I actually make all the individual elements of light to make sure that every facet of a stone is lit correctly, every claw on a ring is lit correctly, every post on the back of an earring is lit correctly. That does not come from standard large, studio equipment. It doesn't exist. You can actually create with a desk lamp and just work around that. You do not need expensive lights. You do not need, what Profoto or Manfrotto or whoever are trying to sell you. You can literally just work it out yourself.
Great advice. Thank you so much, Leo. That was really interesting. And just to wrap it up, if you have more questions for Leo, follow his account, contact him. You'll see his profile is motorbike. So it's, a bit surprising if you think, I'm following a jewelry photographer. But if you haven't heard it before, apparently motorbikes and jewelry go very nicely together.
Very happily. Yeah. You need to wear your rings on the outside of the gloves.
Absolutely. And something else I wanted to ask you, just to wrap it up, do you have a motto or a philosophy of life, something you would like to share with our audience that for you sums up your professional life?
110%. I just don't ever. I've been called many times Mr. Persistent, and I am very persistent. I'm very focused and set. When you work with such small details, you have to be focused. I would say actually the best advice I've ever been given, which wasn't my advice, but I will give it as my advice, is you're only as good as the images you throw away. And if there's ever a time where you think, I could do it better, but that'll do, you've got to absolutely, every single time, do it as best as the image can possibly be, and then move on to the next image.
Fantastic. I would love to finish on this. I think it's great, but we have really nice questions from our audience. Will you consider create a masterclass?
So I have been doing masterclasses for employees of Tiffany and Cartier. During the pandemic, everything was sold over WhatsApp, and they've continued to do so. So they wanted their staff to have a very kind of interesting understanding of how to capture on their phones. So I do have a syllabus of how to capture jewelry on your phones. I did one masterclass with GemX, who are a wonderful organization we have in New York and London. and I would be happy to do more. I would need to receive a great amount of interest because it's not totally on my radar. Although I have advertised a couple of times, I've never managed to totally fulfill it. But yes, I'm just wary because one assumes when you take lessons, be it a language lesson, if you go and learn French, you sign up to a course. Within 1 or 2 lessons, you're not speaking French. And I do believe that the language of jewelry photography requires more than 1 or 2 classes. It requires several years of experimentation, time, interest, training. So I would love to lend a hand and to show people, like certain tips and tricks. But you have to be prepared that to do a masterclass, it'll take a while.
All right. So thank you so much. As I said, if you have more questions for Leo, please send them to us or to Leo directly. Leo, thank you so much for being generous with your time and your advice and sharing your experience and your career. And we'll be saving this recording on this account and also on our YouTube channel. So stay tuned for our next episode in the series Careers in the Jewelry Industry. Thank you so much, Leo.
Thank you, Sonia.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining.